These are the 8 stupid mistakes that landlords just keep making, and even just one of these mistakes could cost you thousands. So in this episode of the Property Academy podcast, you're going to learn what those 8 most common mistakes are that Kiwi landlords just keep on making, why you keep falling into this trap, and how to avoid them. And make sure you stick around for number 4, because this is the one that makes me lose my freaking mind.
Andrew, what is the number one mistake on our list of the top 8 mistakes landlords make?
Now, number one is thinking that the rules don't apply to you. Now, I've seen so many investors, and because you're a self-employed business owner, being a property investor, you kind of think you can skirt around the rules. And I'll give you an example. Last week, there was a property investor. They wanted to use our property management company. And so we said, okay, cool. Let's go through the process, make sure you're all compliant, get your healthy homes inspection report done. And he was like, no, that's a couple of $100. I'm not going to spend that. Now, the investor doesn't want to spend the $200 to make sure that it's compliant and able to be rented. Now, the problem is we can't rent it then, because we're not going to rent something outside of the rules, because if your property isn't Healthy Homes compliant and the tenant ends up taking you to the tribunal, they could be awarded massively. And that's going to come out of your pocket as the landlord. And so, you know, the simple fact of the matter is there are rules in this country you need to follow as a landlord. Follow them. Don't try and skirt around them, because it'll bite you in the ass.
And what was going through this investor's mind that made him think, nah, I just won't follow that law?
Well, I just thought nobody checks. It's, you know, it's a relatively new rule. Tenant will be happy. They'll live in the property. He's been an investor for years, so he doesn't like the fact that the government have now put in a new rule that he has to follow. And actually, the fact of the matter is, like, there's like a couple of hundred people every quarter, tenants, that take their landlords to the tribunal over Healthy Homes compliance issues. And you could, as the landlord, be charged thousands of dollars. Like, are you really that dumb to not pay the $200 to get the inspection report to scoot around a rule that might cost you like $7,000?
And then another one is like filing tax returns. I remember you telling me a story once about an investor who wanted to buy a property. This was when the interest deductibility rules were different than what they are today. And I remember you saying to this guy that if you buy this property, you are going to have to pay tens of thousands of dollars in tax. And then just remind me, what did he say?
He was like, oh, that's okay. I just won't file a tax return. Now, as much as he might dislike paying tax, not paying your tax and not filing a tax return, it's called fraud. And there are such serious ramifications for that. So these are just like the stupid things. I'm like, if you're actually going to be in the business of property investment, do it right or don't do it at all.
I mean, it's almost like, can you believe that we still have to say, this is mistake number 1, is thinking the rules don't apply to you. But then people legitimately think that they don't apply, or think, oh, well, I know it applies, but I'm just going to break them anyway and risk getting the fine. And then they get the fine and they're very upset, or they're very upset when the IRD decides to do an audit on them, and then they've got to pay their accountants a lot of money to actually respond to that audit. But mistake number 2 that landlords need to stop making is renting to friends. And this is just... it's such a classic one. It's friends and family, though. And I know why people do it. It's because they think, well, that's great. This tenant, they're my friend, they're my family, they know me, so they'll always pay the rent. And then if they know me, I can give them a little bit of a discount because I'm not going to need a property manager. But what you forget about it is it goes the other way too, because then I've seen a lot of situations where the tenant goes, they're my friend. They won't mind if I'm a little bit late paying rent, or, oh, I've made a mark on the floor. They won't mind. They're my friend. And this house has gone up in value. They're going to be fine. They'll let me off the hook. And I remember we once had a guy on our podcast for Case Study Sunday. He rented a property out to his friends. Those friends found out that he was buying another property. He wanted to buy, I think it was his 3rd property. And so they thought, he's richer than all of us. And they just stopped paying rent. Right? Now, they're not friends anymore, but it is much, much better to rent to somebody who's not your friend, because then you've got to follow the processes correctly. For instance, if you decide to rent to friends or family, you might think, well, that's fine. I won't need to ask them for a bond because they're my friend. They're going to look after the property. And then when something breaks and then they don't want to pay for it, that's when you run into issues. So it's much better to separate out your personal life from your business life. And being a landlord, being a property investor, that falls into your business life, your making money life. I do say to people, if your like instinct or impulse is to lower the rent $50 for your friend, and that's how you want to support them, just give them $50 a week instead. Now, most people wouldn't do that because they'll say, oh, well, I don't want to give them money. Well, that's the equivalent if you're going to rent a property out to them for $50 a week less. So what difference does it make?
At least you've locked in the worst case scenario at that stage.
And then you could stop it. You could stop paying them if you're no longer friends with them. But what's the third mistake people make?
The half property investment. And this is kind of like the lifestyle investment hybrid. This is where you've decided, I really like the idea of retiring to Nelson. And so I'm going to buy a lifestyle block there where I can retire at some stage, and I'm going to rent it out for the next 20 years. And as a result, I compromise greatly on what makes a good investment because it's something that I want as a lifestyle property for myself later on down the track. And every time, without fail, that I see an investor start to apply a personal lens to an investment property, they compromise on the investment criteria and they get a bad investment. Like my advice to you is this. Forget about the fact of what you might think you might want in 20 years' time, because that could change anyway. And just think about how you're going to use the next 10, 20 years to make as much money from your investments as possible so that then you can sell those investments, take that money and buy whatever it is you want in the future. Don't make that personal lens cloud your judgment when it comes to buying a decent investment, because every time someone ends up with a low-yielding investment property, and this is the same when it comes to batches as well that I might rent out on Airbnb every now and then. If you're buying an investment, make it a good investment based on your investment criteria.
And when Andrew says my advice to you, he's not talking about formal financial advice, right? Where he's saying, you there listening to this is what you should do with your money. He's talking about generally. The other thing that I see here is that people might buy like a holiday home and they tell themselves, no, I'm buying this as an investment for Airbnb. But then what they do is they hardly rent it out, or they choose to stay in it during peak seasons, during Christmas, Labor weekend, Easter, which are the weeks where, or the weekends especially, where you're really going to make some money out of this. And then they're only renting it out off peak when demand and prices are low. And people fool themselves so much. I once had an investor message me and say, oh yeah, we're going to buy this as a holiday home, but also as an investment, but we're not going to fall into any of those traps. And they always do.
Always.
Just don't do the half investment. It doesn't exist. It's either for personal use or it's an investment. Now, what is mistake number 4 that you see all of the time?
This is when investors run the back of the envelope numbers. And look, the way most Kiwi investors check the cash flow is just so dumb and so basic. And there's not, like, it's not your fault. It's probably that there's not been tools out there, or there hasn't been the advice to help you do it. But the way they look at it is they'll look at, okay, well, what's my mortgage going to be? What are the repayments on that mortgage? What's the rent going to be? Does the rent cover the mortgage? And if it does, they say, oh, that makes a good investment. Or if it doesn't, they're like, oh, that's a bad investment because it's making a loss. That's not the way you figure out if something is a good investment or a bad investment. In fact, it's completely wrong. You've got to factor in, when it comes to the cash flow, so many other costs like the rates, the maintenance, the insurance, vacancy, your major capital expenses like a roof being replaced, tax, particularly if you're paying down principal and interest, because remember, your cash flow could be negative and then you could be paying tax on top of that. There's so many things that you need to factor in if you're going to run the numbers properly when it comes from cash flow.
And that's why you really need to use Opus Plus. This is our free online app that lets you run your own numbers and on any property in the country. And it kind of solves this back of the envelope problem because it factors all of this in and gives you a cash flow forecast. So instead of guessing whether a property is going to stack up or not, you can kind of see it in black and white. I'll drop a link down in the description so everybody can get it. But mistake number 5 that I often see is selling a property too early. And that's because you might buy a property and you hold it for 5 to 7 years, and maybe it's gone up by like $200,000. And then you say, this is great, let's sell it and buy a boat. Because I wanted to invest in property to make more money. I've done it now. Now I can go and spend it on a trip somewhere. And people forget that the real reason you bought the property wasn't to buy a boat in 5 to 7 years, most likely. More often, at least in New Zealand, it's for your long-term retirement. And you probably bought that property with the intention of holding it for 15, 20 years, maybe even longer. But then as soon as you see those initial gains, you think, great, I want a boat right now, so maybe I should sell that and go and buy it. And the thing is, us humans, our brains work against us so often. We are very biased in that we want stuff now. We value the immediate rewards, and we tend to forget about the long-term gains, especially if we can take money and then spend it on ourselves to improve our lives today, because that's going to make us feel good today. And I'll give you a really good example. Now, I really like this investor, and I don't want people to think I'm ragging on him, but we had a great guy called Mark come on Case Study Sunday. Now, this guy's 63 years old, lives in Tauranga, and he's invested in properties in the past. They've gone up in value. He's sold them down, and he's spent the money on other things, and some of them have been really good investments. He's got his own business and things like that. But I remember when he came on the show, he said, look, I wish that I just didn't sell those properties because I would have made so much more money. So we're down to the final 3 mistakes. What's mistake number 6?
Number 6 is undervaluing professional expertise and just thinking, because we're Kiwis, we can do it all ourselves. We can jump on YouTube and we can figure it out. And this is fresh in my mind after having Peter Wolfkamp on our podcast. He's the builder from The Block, the TV show. And on that show, he helps contestants, work through the renovations. He said that when he's actually talking to people, he's amazed at how many people just undervalue the experience and the expertise that someone like him has from just 20, 30, 40 years of doing something. And people think, well, I've watched The Block. I know which way a hammer goes. I've heard of a nail. I've listened to the Property Academy podcast. I know how to run the numbers myself. And then all of a sudden they think they're experts. And like this, it's funny. Every now and then I'll talk to an investor and they will say something that I'll disagree with, and they'll say, "Oh, but you said this on the podcast." I'm like, "Yes, but that you've listened to one podcast. There's also 20 years worth of investing experience here. You haven't considered X, Y, and Z."
And this is kind of the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. That's when you learn a little bit about something and now all of a sudden you think you're an expert. And that's probably because you are an expert compared to where you were 2 weeks ago, but you're not an expert compared to somebody who's been doing it for 10 or 20 years. And what you often see is that once somebody learns a little bit about a topic, they see huge progress very quickly because they're starting from nothing, and they feel like they are God's gift to that topic, whatever it happens to be. Then you learn a little bit more and you realize, oh, there is a lot of stuff that I actually don't know. And then you build that confidence back up over time. But typically, people who learn a little bit about a topic tend to feel very confident. It's like the little old saying, you know enough to be dangerous because you feel so confident about it. But just check yourself before you wreck yourself, homie.
Homie?
Yeah. But it also makes you think, well, why is it that people sometimes think that doing everything themselves will save them money? Because sometimes it will, right? Like if you can paint a wall, like painting a wall is pretty low skill. Like it's probably going to save you a lot of money if you do that compared to if you hired a professional to do it. Same with cleaning. Cleaning is very simple. You're able to do that. Plumbing, electricity, anything that like involves putting up new walls, we got to get professionals to do that. And what a lot of people don't realize on the financial side is that a lot of the services don't cost you any money. For instance, if you use a mortgage advisor, they're not going to charge you a fee most of the time. They get paid by the banks. If you think about a lot of insurance advisors, they don't charge you to go sort out your insurance. They get paid by the insurance company. If I think about our company, Opus Partners, we go out and find investment properties. We don't charge a fee for that. We get paid by the person who's selling the property. And so a lot of the time, professionals have tools, data, and experience that you don't. But it's really hard to value that or see that up front. And that kind of brings me to mistake number 7, which is forgetting the top up. Now, I know this is so classic, Andrew, which is that people might even run the numbers. You might even use Opus Plus to do it and see like, oh, cool, my property, the rent doesn't cover all of the costs, so I've got to top up the property by $100 a week. Then, all of a sudden, they get the rent in, and they don't put their top up in.
Often it's because they've got a cashback from the bank, and so they've got a bit of a buffer and they think I'll set it up later, or they just don't get into the habit of doing it.
Or the other thing that might happen is they say, oh, but the rent actually is covering the mortgage payment that's going out. And so I don't think that I actually need to put a top up in, even though the cash flow forecast said that I did need to. And then they get a rates bill, or a residents association bill, or they might get a bill from their accountant, and all of a sudden they're like, but where's the money? And it's like, the reason you're struggling is because you're not putting the top up in when you knew that you were going to have to do it. And Andrew, what's mistake number 8?
Not having a plan. Like, when I think back to when I started investing in property, I knew I wanted to build my wealth. And I knew that I wanted to do that through property because it's too dumb to go to university like you, Ed. And so I just wanted to get started. So I started buying rental properties. But I probably took on unnecessary risk, i.e. debt, because I didn't actually have a plan in place. And then when I just keep buying properties, yep, it's worked out well for me, but it could have gone the other way. And I think so many investors need to actually sit down and have a plan, i.e. what do I want to achieve? How long is it going to take? How long can I do this over? I.e. do I have 10 years? Do I have 15 years? Do I have 30 years? And then narrow it down to, well, what is going to be my specific type of investment? And then make sure we follow that plan.
And I think what every New Zealander needs is a written plan, a written financial plan for how they're going to achieve their goals. And I think a lot of financial hurt that happens in this country is because people have not sat down and ever seriously spent an hour thinking about their money. And so if you've listened to all of this and think about, oh, actually, maybe I don't have a written plan for how I am going to achieve whatever I want to achieve in life from a financial perspective, the first step is to sit down with a financial advisor and create a wealth plan. And if you book a free 1-hour session with one of our financial advisors at Opus Partners, after an hour, you can walk away with your wealth plan written down. I think it's about 13 or 14 odd pages long, with what you're going to do and when. And then you'll at least have the confidence about what your future is going to look like.
Now you know that being a landlord isn't just about buying a house and hoping for the best, but even if you avoid making these 8 mistakes, 99% of Kiwi landlords still lose money. So click this video now and I'll show you exactly why most landlords lose money and how to avoid being one of them.